Trump draws the anti-China line in Jamaica. The real story. Imagine this. Donald Trump sipping a Diet Coke at Mar-a-Lago summons a handful of Caribbean leaders, including Jamaica's Prime Minister, for a little friendly chat. Or maybe not so friendly. The topic, China, more specifically China's so-called predatory economic practices in the Caribbean. But here's the kicker, Jamaica is at the heart of this geopolitical tug-of-war. So what's really going on here? Let's break it down. Hey patriotic internet friends and family, welcome back to the channel. In this video, the battle lines are drawn. The Trump administration isn't exactly a fan of China's growing influence in Latin America and the Caribbean. For decades, the US has viewed the region as its backyard. But here's the problem. China has been making some major moves, investing in infrastructure, pouring billions into trade, and even funding key projects in Jamaica, from roads to seaports, bridges to stadiums. China's fingerprints are everywhere. Trump's response: he invites leaders from Jamaica, the Bahamas, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and St. Lucia to his Florida resort to discuss the issue. Translation: the US wants Jamaica to pick a side, Team America or Team China. In other words, kick out China, cut off China, get rid of China. And let's be real, Trump isn't exactly known for his diplomatic finesse. But why is Jamaica so important in this power struggle? And how did we even get here? Stay with me. Trump versus Jamaica-China ties. For nearly 5 decades, Jamaica and China have had a solid relationship, starting from diplomatic ties in 1972. Over the years, China became one of Jamaica's biggest economic partners, funding major infrastructure projects and opening new trade routes. Every Jamaican Prime Minister, from Michael Manley to Andrew Holness, has made official visits to China. Meanwhile, Jamaica's meetings with US presidents not as frequent. Now here's where it gets messy, and we're not talking the baller. The Trump administration calls China's influence predatory, arguing that their loans and investments traps countries in a debt crisis. But let's flip the script. Jamaica, with its struggling economy and infrastructure needs, sees China as a reliable partner. It's a classic case of who needs who more. Basically, Jamaica need China more than how we need America. The dramatic conflict. US officials are literally driving on Chinese-built roads, paying tolls to Chinese companies, and attending meetings in Chinese-constructed government buildings. Irony much? China is outpacing the US in education, trade, and infrastructure investments in Jamaica. Trump's government accuses China of economic colonization, while Jamaica insists it's just business. China is not economically colonizing Jamaica. They are lying. Just stay tuned and keep watching the video till the end. I have all the facts, I have all the receipts, I have the tea. So keep watching. China is the best thing what could have ever happened to Jamaica at this point. The Trump administration ramps up pressure, sending officials like former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to warn Jamaica about China's intentions. The question is, will Jamaica cave to US pressure or stick to its long-standing China ties? Is Jamaica about to become ground zero for Trump's anti-China campaign? And can the island nation afford to resist the fallout and future moves? So what did Jamaica do? Let's just say the response has been complicated. While the government appears to be leaning towards the US in public statements, behind the scenes, China's influence remains strong. Loans and infrastructure projects don't just disappear overnight. Former Jamaican governments managed to maintain good relations with both superpowers, but the Trump administration's America First policy isn't leaving much room for middle ground. And we equally have a Jamaica First policy where we are say China and we are say BRICS. The pressure is on for PM Holness or any other future Jamaican Prime Minister. Does he prioritize diplomatic relations with the US, or does he continue to embrace China's investments for Jamaica's economic growth? One thing is clear, Jamaica isn't about to cut ties with China anytime soon, but how it balances this geopolitical tightrope will determine the island's future. Here's a summary of the highlights and the key points. The US views China's growing influence in the Caribbean as a national security threat. Trump invites Caribbean leaders, including Jamaica, to discuss countering China. China has heavily invested in Jamaica's infrastructure, trade, and education. The Trump administration accuses China of economic predation, while Jamaica insists it's just business. Jamaica is caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war, with pressure mounting from both sides. The future of Jamaica's US-China relations remains uncertain, but China's economic grip isn't loosening anytime soon. The Trump administration frequently criticized China's global economic strategy, particularly through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. The US government under President Donald Trump labeled China's influence as predatory, arguing that Beijing's financial and investment practices were designed to entrap developing nations in a cycle of dependency. 1. The concept of predatory influence. The term predatory influence suggests that China's economic engagements, particularly in infrastructure financing, are exploitative rather than mutually beneficial. The Trump administration and its officials, including former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, accused China of using deceptive economic strategies to gain leverage over countries, particularly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. 2. Debt trap diplomacy allegations. The Trump administration argued that China deliberately lent large sums of money to developing nations that could not afford to repay the loans. The claim was that China structured these loans in a way that once repayment became difficult, Beijing could seize strategic assets or exert significant political influence over the indebted countries. Keynote and pay attention to all of that. Because further down in the video, I go prove to you and show you say a lie Trump them a tell upon China. That's why you see them use words like accused and allegations. I have all of the receipts, so stay tuned. Example, the case of Sri Lanka is often cited as evidence of debt trap diplomacy. When Sri Lanka struggled to repay back Chinese loans used to build the Hambantota port, it was forced to lease the port to a Chinese company for 99 years. Giving Beijing strategic control over an important marine route. 3. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and its risk. The BRI, launched in 2013, is a massive global infrastructure project aimed at connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through a network of roads, railways, ports, and energy projects. While China promotes the initiative as a win-win for global development, critics, including the Trump administration, argue that it primarily serves China's interests by expanding its economic and political reach. The loans provided under the BRI often have opaque terms, high interest rates, and limited transparency, raising concerns about the economic sovereignty of recipient nations. 4. The U.S. response under Trump. In response to China's growing economic footprint, the Trump administration took several countermeasures. Blocking Chinese investments in the U.S., the administration tightened restrictions on Chinese firms acquiring U.S. technology and critical infrastructure. Promoting alternatives. The U.S. encouraged alliances like the Blue Dot Network with Japan and Australia to offer alternative infrastructure financing options. Criticizing multilateral institutions, Trump's team urged international organizations like the IMF and World Bank to be wary of China's lending practices and the risk they pose to global financial stability. 5. Counterarguments and China's defense. China rejected these accusations, arguing that the loans are voluntary agreements between sovereign nations. The BRI has helped develop infrastructure in regions that Western investors have neglected. The U.S. criticisms were politically motivated, aimed at undermining China's rise as a global economic power. Conclusion. The Trump administration framed China's economic influence as a strategic threat, warning that its financial tactics were a modern form of economic imperialism. While the debate over debt trap diplomacy continues, the discussion reflects broader geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and China over global influence, trade, and economic supremacy. I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that, President Trump. If we're being honest, the IMF and the World Bank are the multilateral companies which engage in economic imperialism or economic colonization through their loans and their strict austerity measures. So make us keep it real. Let's keep it 100. That's why economies were sign up to IMF and World Bank loan, they never prosper, they never develop, then just stuck in our debt trap diplomacy. Those are the practices of the IMF and the World Bank. And we are going to go in an even deeper dive. The specific examples and counter arguments on China's predatory influence. While the Trump administration accused China of using debt trap diplomacy to extend its geopolitical influence, the reality is more complex. Here are specific examples of alleged debt trap diplomacy and counter arguments that challenge or reframe the narrative. Key examples of alleged debt trap diplomacy. Sri Lanka Hambantota Port 2017. The claim: the Sri Lankan government borrowed heavily from China to build the 1.3 billion Hambantota port despite concerns about its commercial viability. Unable to repay the debt, Sri Lanka leased the port to China Merchants Port Holdings for 99 years in 2017. This was seen as China using debt to gain control over a strategically located port along vital Indian Ocean trade routes. The counter-argument: Sri Lanka's total external debt was around 83 billion and only 10% of it was owed to China, suggesting that China was not the primary driver of the crisis. Much of Sri Lanka's financial financial struggles stemmed from Western-issued sovereign bonds and mismanagement by its own government rather than Chinese lending. The decision to lease the port was made by Sri Lanka itself, not dictated by Beijing. 2. Pakistan. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. The claim: China loaned $62 billion to Pakistan as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, funding highways, railways, and power plants. Many of these projects came with high interest loans, increasing Pakistan's debt burden. Pakistan was forced to seek a $6 billion IMF bailout in 2019, with concerns that China would demand strategic concessions in return for debt relief. Counter-argument: Pakistan's total external debt is over $125 billion, and only about 30% is from China. The rest come from institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and Western lenders. China has rescheduled and restructured loans for Pakistan multiple times, showing flexibility rather than predatory intent. Many CPEC projects have helped improve energy production and infrastructure, benefiting Pakistan's long-term development. So how Trump and the US government paint or frame China as this economic predator, when in truth and in reality, if you peel behind the layers, you will see countries like Jamaica also indebted to the IMF and the World Bank. So not just China alone lend Jamaica money. And in the case of even Sri Lanka, you can see the 83 billion where Sri Lanka owe, only 10% of that 83 billion belongs to China. So still, on a China fault, why Sri Lanka economy end up collapse. So there is always more to the story. So these are just the examples and counter arguments. So this is a real deep dive. 3. Djibouti strategic military access. The claim: Djibouti, a small but strategically located country in East Africa, took massive loans from China for infrastructure development, raising its debt to GDP ratio to over 70%. In 2017, China established its first overseas military base in Djibouti, fueling concerns that economic pressure was used to secure a strategic foothold. The US warned that Djibouti might be forced to hand over control over its port to China if it failed to repay debts. Counter-argument: Djibouti actively sought Chinese investment because Western countries were unwilling to finance its infrastructure projects. China's loans have helped Djibouti modernize its ports, railways, and roads, improving trade capacity. Djibouti government denies that it was forced into hosting a Chinese military base, arguing that it made an independent strategic choice. Counter-arguments against the debt trap diplomacy narrative. 1. Most countries owe more to Western lenders than to China. A study by Johns Hopkins University found that many countries accused of being in a Chinese debt trap actually owed more debt to Western-backed institutions, IMF, World Bank, Paris Club, and private lenders, than to China. So you see, the West, specifically China's biggest Western adversary, America, has spread propaganda and lies on China. If you know anything about America, America is a mass manipulating propaganda machine. Example, in Africa, only 17% of total external debt is owed to China, while 35% is owed to private Western banks and 32% to multilateral institutions. institutions. Keynote and pay attention to that. Pull it back up and listen it again. Critics argue that China is being unfairly singled out while Western financial institutions engage in their own forms of high-interest lending and economic coercion. Facts, 100% accurate. You see, America and the IMF and the World Bank is very guilty of heavily putting pressure on countries like Jamaica, exerting extreme political influence on countries like Jamaica. So whatever the West is accusing China of, that is what America is doing. Behind the scenes, countries like America are the real bandit and culprit in the situation. But guess what? It's called misdirection. So anything where them accuse China of, them are the ones who are actually guilty of it. So I just smoke and mirrors when you hear America or Trump say, oh, China this, oh, China that. 2. China frequently restructures or cancels debt. Unlike the IMF and World Bank, which often demand austerity measures in exchange for loan restructuring, China has taken a different approach. Between 2000 and 2019, China cancelled at least 3.4 billion in African debt. Look at that. Look on that. IMF or World Bank nor America never do that for no African country. Them never write off no debt or have no debt forgiveness policy towards Jamaica. So why me fi hate China? Because Trump or America say so? Because England and Canada say so? China could never be my enemy or Jamaica enemy. China never enslave Africans. So no Western mainstream media outlet can make me hate somebody whenever do me or my people nothing. China has also rescheduled loans for Ethiopia, Angola, and Zimbabwe without requiring them to implement harsh economic policies. Keynote and pay attention to all of that. Everything when we just read. Example, in 2018, China waived 78 million in debt owed by Cameroon to ease financial pressure. That's why you can't listen to Western media, you know. You can't listen to Western mainstream media. Can't listen to Trump and America. Remember, so when you say China, you say BRICS, you know. So Trump and America and the West now have no choice but to demonize China. Because if you demonize China, you demonize BRICS. And we know say BRICS is the best thing wherever happened to the world. See, Cuba joined BRICS, you know. Cuba joined BRICS. Because we know a long time America have a trade embargo and some serious economic sanctions from Cuba for ever since. Remember, say Fidel Castro and Russia has always been allies from the days of the Soviet Union. So we are talking about as far back as 1959. That's how far Russia and Cuba are come from. And when you say Russia, you say BRICS. So it was a natural progression for Cuba end up join BRICS. And with all of those economic punishments where America did exert and put on Cuba, Cuba still survive and still thrive. Cuba end up have some of the best doctors and nurses in the world. So for all people when you say, oh, if Jamaica go join BRICS, America go cut we off. So what? You don't want to be independent and stand up on your own 2 feet. You don't want to be in a infantile baby stage forever. We're still a creep, still a goo gaga. I depend on people for feed, you know. You don't want to walk and start run and start drive and start fly. That's supposed to be a natural progression for every country and every economy. I think we were lied to and miseducated about communist countries. When you're born and grow in the West, communist countries are painted as evil and wicked and they don't mean nobody no good and they might worst thing on earth. But somehow that doesn't seem to be true at all. Remember, Cuba donate and build 2 schools in Jamaica, you know. That is Jose Marte in St. Catherine and Garvey Maceo in Clarendon. And if you know history, the West and America has always been demonizing communist countries. China communist, Russia communist, Cuba communist, So how them a communist country so kind to other countries? America will say democracy is the best thing. How these democratic countries like America, England and Canada don't help black countries in the way that communist countries help black countries. Fidel Castro did go down to Africa and help liberate Africans from Western imperialism and colonialism. That's a little known fact, historical fact. We have to start fact check these countries who love preach democracy. What does democracy mean? Has America ever donated no money for build no school in a Jamaica? Even one basic school? When Cuba donated and built those 2 schools in Jamaica, Cuba no have it. Cuba struggle just like Jamaica and I try figure it out just like Jamaica. So then give way out of nothing from the goodness of Fidel Castro heart. Rest in peace. Rest in power, my boss. And like America, we always have it. You see Elon Musk dig up a bag of waste spending through USAID. How much billions on top of billions of dollars then squander through USAID if push aquatic creature and transmission agenda in every country where they can push a waste billions. Nah, do not meaningful. Nah, help no countries we need it in no real way. Jamaica also got 1.5 million US for push that said aquatic transmission transformer Decepticon agenda in a Jamaica just the same through USAID. So that is how America choose for uselessly squander their money than for meaningfully help Jamaica. Cause you giving us the 1.5 million US there for push aquatic creature agenda in a Jamaica, cause you want to turn Jamaica in a one big giant aquarium. That's why I'm glad the Democrats them never win. That now help we, and that was under the Biden-Harris administration. And some people are say USAID is a CIA front that is used to push ideological subversions in other countries and in also America. 3 countries have agency in their loan decisions, while critics argue that China exploits developing nations. Many governments actively seek Chinese loans because they offer certain advantages over Western financing, less bureaucracy and fewer conditions compared to loans from the IMF or World Bank, faster approval processes, and the ability to fund large-scale projects quickly. Developing nations often see China as a viable alternative because Western financial institutions have historically been slow or unwilling to fund high-risk projects. The reason why them uninterested to fund high-risk projects are because they don't want to see your country progress and develop. They want to hold you down and keep you right where you're there. I saw the IMF and the World Bank go to work. Jamaica has not prospered or grew or benefited from all these IMF and World Bank loans where we are take from day one. Because the purpose of those loans is not to make you become independent, is to actually keep you dependent on them. And at that Trump accused China of, which is a lie. A rumors Trump has spread from China when he said that. So anything where them accuse China of, or where the Western financial institutions are basically guilty of. When it comes to the World Bank and the IMF, it no matter how much money you borrow from them, you can't take that the money there, build no road, build no highway, repair no road. You can't take your money, build no school or build no hospital, no key infrastructure. Where if you make your country grow and develop and push you forward, you can't use IMF money and World Bank to do nothing like that. Them want to tell you how to spend it, where to spend it, when to spend it, what to spend it on, who to spend it with. Them micromanage you and watch you like a hawk. Some serious financial oversight me I talk about, Remember, a Jamaica money, we have to pay back your loan, plus interest, high interest. And you dictate terms how me fi spend the money, when me fi do with the money, when me can and cannot spend it on. IMF and World Bank are hold down 4. The US and other Western powers also use economic influence. While the Trump administration accused China of economic coercion, the US and its allies have long used financial leverage to gain influence. IMF and World Bank loans often come with strict conditions. Example, structural adjustments, privatization, and austerity measures. The US has used economic sanctions, pressure countries like Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea into compliance with its geopolitical goals. Example, in the 1980s to 1990s, many Latin American and African countries suffered crippling debt crises under Western-backed IMF structural adjustment programs, which led to economic recessions and social unrest. This is why Jamaica need to join BRICS and step away from America and the IMF and the World Bank and just say adios and just go our own way. Walk well left them. These people are diabolical. Don't ever expect a Bakra looking person to actually care about Africans. You would be foolish to expect say, oh, them all have your best interest at heart and them all look out for you. No, they're not. No, they won't. They never have and they never will. That's why I say BRICS all the way. The bigger picture, geopolitical competition. While the Trump administration framed China's lending as a purely exploitative practice, the reality is that both the US and China use economic influence to advance their strategic interest. The criticism of China's BRI is part of a larger US-China rivalry, where Washington seeks to counter Beijing's growing global reach. Some countries benefit from playing both sides, negotiating deals with China while also securing financial aid from the US and its allies. The final takeaways. 1. Debt trap diplomacy is not as clear-cut as the Trump administration portrayed it. Many developing countries choose China loans because they offer alternatives to Western financial systems. 2. Chinese influence is strategic but not always coercive. While some projects raise concerns about debt dependency, China has also cancelled debt and restructured loans in ways that Western lenders often do not. 3. The US and Western institutions engage in their own forms of financial influence. Critics argue that Washington's attack on China's lending practices ignores the historical role of Western institutions in creating debt crises in the global South. 4. The debate is geopolitical as much as economic. The US critiques China's loans because it sees them as a challenge to Western-led financial institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and the global banking system. So what do you think? Is Jamaica playing a dangerous game by trying to balance both superpowers? Or is this just another chapter in the never-ending US-China rivalry? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into geopolitical power plays. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay tuned. See you in the next video. One love, Jamaica!